Welcome to Leadership, the Secret Sauce, the podcast where we talk to extraordinary coaches and leaders to dive into the realms of leadership and coaching. We're your hosts, Dave Lipsky and Matt Dodson. So let's jump in with another guest and find out their answer to the question, what is your secret sauce? Welcome to Leadership, the Secret Sauce. Before we begin, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Character Matters Coaching and Consulting, where they believe that your character is the compass guiding you through life's journey. Whether you're facing personal or professional challenges, they are dedicated to helping you discover and strengthen the core values that define who you are. Dave, what do we have on the podcast today?
I would like to welcome Helen, and I wanted to start off with an energy check-in. We're going to learn more about Helen in just a little bit, but on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low energy, 10 being high, where are you in the present moment?
Oh, what a great question to start off with. Do you know what, Dave? I'm a 9. I'm pretty high right now. We mentioned a little bit before we came on, but I was talking to my publisher. I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about the book in a moment. I've been writing for a few months, and yesterday I had a conversation with the publisher, and she pinged this website up and said, your book is available to pre-order. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so all this work is, so I'm kind of high up there at the moment. Come Monday morning, I might well be back at 2 or 3. But actually, do you know what? I love what I do, and I think I feel very privileged here. And I really thank you for the invite, because I love all things coaching, and I'm really excited about what you guys are doing here. So thank you for the invite, and look forward to the conversation.
We are excited about talking to you, learning more about your book, and I appreciate you coming in at a 9. I'm going to shift over to Matt. Matt, where are you coming in?
Okay. So, Dave, I just wanted to challenge my energy level this morning. One of our listeners said to me, like, hey, can you be anything less than a 9 or an 8? Like, is it possible? I can't. I'll just leave it at that. No, I'm pretty good this morning. I slept in. I mean, yeah.
So I am more customer service oriented. So I will go below I'm going to go with a 7.5, only because I was trying to get a bunch of things done last night, and I ended up working too late. And I have to recognize, like, when I work too late, it's I suffer the next morning. But my 7.5 is rising, because when I got on the call and we got a chance to start talking to Helen and Matt, it's like, the reason we created this podcast is we wanted to learn from great coaches what their secret sauce is. And we really wanted to hang out with coaches because they speak our language. We learn from them. We get to teach others from what they've learned. So it's a very exciting effort for Matt and I. So next question, Helen, is as you are traveling around and when you're getting ready for your book tour, and somebody is next to you and says, hi, Helen, what do you do? How do you describe that?
Oh, I love that question. How do I describe it? I think, firstly, it actually depends on who I'm talking to. Because actually it's about, recognizing your audience, who you're there. But actually, what do? I work with commercial leaders, really to bring the human side of work to work. And it really combines my passion around coaching and coaching approach that we can talk about, that I developed over the course of 30 years working in primarily professional practice and industry, but actually putting a commercial lens on it. And that's the difference about what I bring. So I'm really human-centered, working with commercial leaders. And for me, it's about the integration and the blend of the two that's really exciting.
It's nice to hear. I imagine they could understand it. Helen, what is your secret sauce? If someone were to ask you that question, like, what makes you you?
What makes me me? When I talk about what I do, we talk about how you show up is the H in the human framework that I work with. It's about being truly authentic. I'm a mum of 2 teenage boys. I'm a wife to a husband who works, in the city, and we live in Wimbledon in southwest London. It's about, for me, bringing everything I do together and not being afraid to show up as who I am. That is my commercial background. I originally trained as a chartered accountant. So by first trade, I'm a chartered accountant. By second trade, I'm an executive coach. And what makes me me is my ability to bring the commerciality, we talked about that just now, the human-centered approach, the coaching approach that I take to everything that I do, but also bringing who I am as a human being, who I am as a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, and general juggler of what life is. And I think my secret sauce is my ability to combine those and bring each of those to every conversation that I have. Whether that's with colleagues, whether it's clients, whether it's with friends.
And since you've been sort of on your own, in your own business for a few years, so did you know that when you started out, or at what point in time in your career did you know, like, hey, that is my secret sauce? That did someone mention it to you? Did you just discover it, or?
So it's a great question. So I'll give you a little bit of a potted history, and for the listeners as well, about where I've come from, because I think it's relevant in the course of what you've just asked. Because I started my career with Arthur Andersen, for those people that remember the firm. Was there about 6 years, actually, just as it was going under. I was, at a time in my career, I was sort of a manager. I was looking up in the partnership, and I thought, I don't want to be a partner. I never want to sell. That's not me. And I moved into industry, and I actually, whilst I was at Disney, I was sponsored to do a master's in management development and change because I was really passionate about people. So that was kind of the genesis of where my career started to pivot. Didn't move into HR. I thought I came into KPMG Consulting in the UK, which was where I was when I had my first and second son. And at that time I was given a coach. And as I found, I loved coaching in terms of, what it linked with commercial, what it linked from the human side of things. Roll forward, and I ended up in an internal role, and then I ended up in a sales role. I was a global client leader. And people said to me, why are you good at what you do? If we could sprinkle everybody with a bit of what you do, we would be in a different place, which is, it comes back to your secret sauce question, right? What is your secret sauce? And I didn't know. And I unpicked it. I said, the reason that I'm good at what I do is because I've been trained as a coach. Because all the skills that you and I have, because it's DNA as a professional coach in terms of creating psychological safety for people to talk to us, listening, following, asking the right questions, going deeper, challenging with safe space, curiosity. All of these skills enabled me to have board level conversations with CEOs, general counsel, head of HR, head of IT. I wasn't a deep expert in their field, but what I could do is I could have great conversations. And so that's a long way of saying my secret sauce was my ability to realize the power of coaching, not just for supporting individuals, not just for leading as a coach, a leader as a coach, but also for developing commercial conversations that impact the top and bottom line. And that's the secret sauce, and that's what I've built the human advantage on.
You know what, Helena, you're bringing up something I think that a lot of times the practical side, especially on the business stuff, like it just sort of dawns on me. It's just a reminder. It has to be intensely practical. It has to affect the bottom line. Otherwise, it's a great conversation, but it really does it affect the business. I think that's oftentimes in my meet and greets or my first conversation, that's what they want to know. Hey, is this going to affect it? Or is this just you're just a nice person to talk to. But it should affect your business results. It should get to that side and not just be interpersonal discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, for me, the power of coaching is taking it to that next level. I think coaching has evolved as a profession, certainly over the last, 10. I was talking to a lady this morning, actually, that's just embarking on a coach development training program. And it made me think back to 10 years ago when I started out my journey as a coach. I started my training in 2015. One of the reasons I didn't move into coaching at that time was, it's a bit of a wild west, compared to being a chartered accountant, where it's very rigorous in the training and development. I think it's certainly improved over the years. I still think there's a way to go. Quite frankly, I still see too many people that say, I've trained as a coach and I've paid $50 and, off I go. Yeah, no, not really. Because it's a real skill, but a real skill that can be used extensively in organizations.
How would I had my first job out of graduate school was KPMG US.
Wow.
So I had a smile when you said that, because they hired me to run what they at the time called Charm School, to help managers, level out
They put you in Charm School
as a student or as a teacher?
The good news is they allowed me to hire outside people that were way more charming to actually do the training.
I've never, maybe that's being a British rep. I've never heard of Charm School in my 30-year career.
I think the idea was that these are the accounting hiring model. You hire a whole bunch of auditors, tax folks, and there's a consulting arm, and then a small percentage continue to move up that are able to talk to clients. Like first you can talk to the client, right? The client in person, right? Then you need to be able to talk to the CFO, and then you need to be able to talk to the CEO. And you had mentioned that. So I'm thinking of like the skills that we looked for, that people displayed to be able to do that. And I'm relating it back to what you said, which is you were able to have conversations with these individuals, people in positions of power, and they experience coaching as helpful in some way. What would they have experienced from you in those conversations? What did you do? Did you tell them it was a coaching? What did you do that they would experience that they said, this is helpful?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a difference between when I'm coaching and when I'm having conversation with clients, where I'm using a coaching approach, because you guys will know the importance of boundaries and ethics when you're actually properly coaching. So I think for me, it's important to make that distinction. If I take it for when I'm working with people as a coach, so when I'm coaching and my coaching clients, what do people experience by working with me? I do a lot of embodied work. So when I first trained as a coach, there was that sort of the grow model that we all know as coaches, that sort of questioning, the listening. There were some models that I was taught in terms of helping leaders to think about things in different ways. And it was good. And it put some framework around some things that I did already, but it stretched my thinking. Before I left KPMG, I sponsored myself through an advanced coaching diploma with a firm called Catalyst 14 in the UK. And it was a lot more about who we are inside of ourselves, how we tap into our emotional intelligence, our embodied intelligence. And so actually when people are experiencing me as a coach, now not somebody having a conversation with a business leader, but that's what they get from me. They get a deep sense of who they are, this creation of space. Very often I'm working with clients outside, using the environment, bringing in the environment, just in different ways. And for me, that's where the real power is. I love that kind of work. And that's the work I love. I was coaching in Regent's Park in central London earlier this week. And, some of the metaphors, some of the things that come up, we say there's no such thing as coincidences. But there's not a lot of coincidences that can happen when you're sat in a square box in an office, right? And so it's not what do I draw on, but what does my client draw on? What do they see going on? Is super powerful.
Yeah. Say more about getting out of the space into Regent's Park. What did that do for your coaching?
I think it just creates a sense of space. It creates an open mind. A shift in perspective. We talk in coaching about thinking about the environment that you're in. Where are you at? If somebody's struggling with something, what do? You think about getting away from your computer and getting out. If we're trying to have transformation, and I mean transformational conversations now, this isn't just, a coaching conversation to help you through a little problem, because quite frankly, these days there might be a robot that can help you ask yourself a question, right? this is where the power of coaching is. It's tapping into a different space and exploring questions and feelings from where people are to where they want to be. And it's a journey. I love walking. It's a sense of how are you walking together. You don't have to stand still. And what does that do? What's the right space for them?
It reminds me of the time where you just have someone get up from their seat to have a different perspective on whatever it is. And they're like,
absolutely,
they can feel totally uncomfortable and just be like, what in the world are you having me do? Are you going to make me do a trust fall here? Whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But
that
that shift in perspective changes as the things around them change. And that could just, when you were mentioning that, I just thought of the number of times that they sit behind the desk and how their thinking stays the same because they're always behind the computer.
Well, where do you think we have our best ideas, right?
Yeah.
So I've been, I'm going to mention the book, but I'll mention the book again. So I've been writing since January. It's basically, the thinking's been done over a period of 18 months, but it's taken me about 3 months to write 46,500 words, which is the first draft that I just put in. And I really wasn't happy with the subtitle of the book. So the title of the book is Human Wise, aligned to the podcast that I do, and the publisher loved that. And we played around with the subtitle, but we couldn't get. And I would spend, I was sitting with a piece of paper and scribbling different ideas, and I just had to say to myself, leave it, Helen, because thinking about it like this isn't going to work. And trust the process. We're saying coaching, like trust the process. You don't quite know where it's going, but trust the process. So you keep writing. And my husband was running the Brighton Marathon 2 or 3 weeks ago here in the UK. And so I was at the stage where I could print some chapters out so I could start scribbling and moving things. And I was literally just sat on the bed reading this manuscript. And I'm like, this is the subtitle. This is and I just wrote it down. And it's Human Wise, Lead from Within and Sell with Confidence. And it just came to me, right? When we try too hard, it doesn't happen. We've got to get out of our spaces. And so I believe that my job as a coach is to help people get out of the spaces. And one of the great ways of doing that is to change the physical space. Even if we're coaching online, I get them to go and walk around a park, and I walk around a park. Now there's a funny story when I learned how to do that. And, you're reviewing when you're training. I was working with a colleague, and she and I work together now. And we were doing this walking, talking, outdoor conversation. And she fell down a ditch because she was so...
More ways than one.
Yeah. She was all right, thankfully. But there was a learning in that actually as a coach, you don't have to be walking, but actually your client may be able to. And that's how I feel together. So, yeah.
Helen, what would you want from a coach? They talk about walking with your friend, or would you want someone to use the environment? Would you want them to take you out of that? What would you like for?
I work with a coach. I work with different coaches, actually. I value somebody that is really going to stretch my thinking, that is really going to challenge me in a different way, and particularly as a coach, I'm reasonably good at exploring some of this stuff for myself. I wouldn't say perfect, because actually I know the value of coaching and every so often, but, I want somebody to take me out of my comfort zone, to help me look at things with a different perspective and create insight for me that I can take away and do something with. That may be an action, that might not be an action, depending on the conversation. But yeah.
I have to ask, so since you've been on your own for a few years, would you have wanted that same thing a few years ago when you were starting out?
Yeah. And I had coach. I kept working with my coach. And so I've evolved with different coaches for what my needs were. And I think that's important to recognize as well. Some people have long-term relationships with clients. Actually, I'm a firm believer in, yes, good, sustainable relationships, but actually some coaches are right for people at some point in their life and different for others. And I think it's actually, I don't like to see coaching relationships go over too much of an extended time, because then you're not really a crutch, you're a mentor. And so yeah, very much so. Because actually starting a business is lonely. And it's really hard. And it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. Wouldn't say that I would have changed it for the world, but yeah, it's lonely and it's hard.
Yeah. For some of our listeners that are starting their own business or thinking about it, what would you suggest? Like, what do you think about when you think, well, hey, look, this was a big pivot point for me when I started out?
I think I'm going to come back and I'm going to draw on the human framework that I talk about in my book. So the human framework is something that I've created, but because it's really linking, we talked about the coaching approach and commercial focus, and that applies equally to coaches starting out in the business. Technical experts, brilliant at what you do, but not really used to walking the floors, going out and building networks. The H of the framework is how you show up. So my advice is work out who you are as a coach. So when I started out, I built a website. I've got a small website. It's not particularly fancy, but it's there. The process of just writing who I was as a coach was helpful, not just to put it onto the website and that sort of, but actually for describing who I was. Who is my market? Who do I want to be working with? What is my skill set? What is my background? Where am I going to add most value? And so for me, and it's the same with all selling that I talk about, influencing, until we really understand ourselves, we can't really serve and help others. So I would get them to start with that. And then I would go into the U, which is understand others. So once you've done how you know who you are, but how do you understand others? Who are your target market? Where are they sat? What are the market rates? What do they pay? What are you looking to charge? What is it that's important to them? What's going to make them successful? And then how do you get your right mindset? A mindset is where I really link that coaching approach. And I think coaches are in a really super space because actually we have these skills. We just don't think of them as skills to be getting out to building our business. But actually get curious, get out there, build your network, focus on the relationships that will matter. And don't be afraid to ask the questions, right? How do you buy coaching? What do you use? And all of that time you're building up a picture. And that's the sort of thing when I did, when I started out 3 years ago, it was literally a blank email and a sort of a seedling of an idea. I was like, what can you do, Helen? You can coach. Where's your network? Let's go and have a conversation with your network about what it is they do. Do they use coaches? Who could they refer you to? And then when you get in those rooms, the A, the human, is how you act and adapt. So how you show up, because you're bringing all that great stuff that you know. But then we're just being ourselves as coaches, that humanness, adapting, listening, following. And then I always have next steps, right? As a coach, we always have, what are the next steps? That might even just be reflection. That doesn't have to be an action. But what are the next steps after every single meeting? How do you flow through? What do you do? And it's just building that sort of resilience, the repetition, but building a business that's right for you. And if you do that, the clients will find you if you open up to them.
What would be your personal advice to yourself 3 years ago? If you found yourself what would you say?
What would I say? Keep believing, keep going. And I developed a motto for myself, which is still true today. One conversation at a time. You never quite know where it's going to get to. And that's what's held me through. It's held me through in those times that are tough or that I don't know where it's going to go next. Like, Helen, just go out and have a conversation. The time that I found the hardest is when I was just sat at home behind my laptop. And my husband would say, you can tell. You asked a great question at the beginning, Dave, about where's your energy? My energy was a 9 when I was out meeting people, and I'd had 2 or 3 meetings in a day, and I'd come back and I was buzzing. You counter that with a day where I'd been sat in front of my computer trying to think about something to write on LinkedIn or maybe an article that somebody might read. And I was at a 2, if not a 1, if not a -2. And, my husband got the worst of that because it's like, and he's just get out there and talk to people. And that would be my advice is have no fear, do it anyway. And if it doesn't work, learn from it. I mean, you guys are doing a brilliant podcast. I love it. I never thought I'd be doing a podcast. I'd be hosting a podcast when I started the business 3 years ago. Never in a million years.
Yeah.
So embrace the opportunities and see where each conversation takes you.
What did you learn about doing the podcast?
What do you mean about what did I learn about doing? What do you mean about
what did you learn about yourself and in your quest, like everything that you describe in your journey? How'd the podcast contribute, and what did you learn about?
I think it was twofold. I think number one, it was connecting me and collaborating with like-minded individuals. So we talk about stretching thinking. You know, I came out of a Big Four professional services firm. And I work generally with a certain type of person, right? And so the podcast has given me the ability to connect and relate to some fabulous individuals from different walks of life that have all got a common passion around the human side of business. And that's super interesting because I always love to learn from others. I don't, I want to keep learning. But it's also challenged my thinking. So I found that a lot of my thinking develops by talking to other people. You know, some people are different. You know, we're all different characters, and some people think and reflect by being very inward and sit on themselves. I like the energy that other people give me. And so my own thinking has developed over the course of, 38, 40 episodes that I've recorded now. And I could feel it. I come back to the book. Because again, there was all these sticky bits going, but I'm writing a book and I'm doing a podcast, and how does it all fit together? And it was about 2/3 of the way through the book, and there was just this, a bit like these aha moments you get in coaching, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, right? This is how this links to this and this links to that. And that golden, I call it a golden thread, but the golden thread starts to come through. Learning from each other and learning with each other, I think. To summarize that random, obviously I talk a lot.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, I want to say I appreciate that. And it's Matt and I have done I think a few less episodes, but it's a learning process.
What have you learned from it?
And we're I'm gonna be a good coach and ask Matt first. Matt,
that's taking yourself off the spot, Dave.
Yeah.
Way to go. You can put me right back on the spot. Go ahead.
I think maybe this is probably when you kind of scratch the surface and you really find out from a coach really what's underneath. There are some common things. And I think, I'll just sort of add to what you were describing, this idea around your own personal introspection as a coach and how you show up. I don't know if I really understood how important that was to showing up as a coach in my own business. That oftentimes is what my client is asking for, is someone that has been thoughtful and self-aware, introspective. And that's what we're really looking for on this podcast, is to really just kind of scratch the surface and find out, like, hey, what makes you tick? Why are you you? You could call it whatever you want. You could call it purpose.
Yeah.
But I could get a little philosophical, but I would just say that has been like the biggest thing for me, is getting to the heart of what makes the coach, and like, when did they know? Like, most of the time it was a light bulb. It was somebody else mentioning that they had never thought about before, or they didn't realize it almost showed up. And that was that moment.
Yeah. It was that same, that I described. It was that, a couple of things, you're brilliant at what you do. Why is that? If we can sprinkle everybody with a bit of you, what would that be? And I didn't know. And, actually, and this comes back to coaching and the power of questions. Those were questions posed at me that made me think. That wasn't somebody telling me what my secret sauce was. That was me unpicking it for myself. And there's a great quote that I use when we're talking about knowing yourself, is from Aristotle, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Because until we really can understand ourselves and what's important to us and what makes us tick, how can we really put ourselves inside of other people's minds to help them work out what's right for them? What about you, Dave? What have you learned? You put Matt on the spot, but what about you? Oh, well, you're not getting off that lightly.
I don't know. I mean, introspection, Aristotle. How do I follow it up? So I think, like, for me, it's similar to coaching. People have beautiful stories, incredible superpowers, and so much of coaching is helping people see their story in a way that empowers them to move forward. And my coaching development on the other side of that, I really liked what you said about, like, we need to know ourselves, and then we need to know others, right? And then we need to help them make the journey. For me, the development plan has always been to say less and mean more. And in coaching, the less I am taking up space, the better coach I am. And I think in podcasting, it's somewhat similar. The story is about the person coming in, right? But then there's some really good conversation that makes
and I love that too. And I was sharing it with somebody earlier this week. You can see I'm a natural talker, right? You're going to have to shut me up at some point and go, time's up, Helen. But one of the things I love about coaching is it takes me into a completely different space because I'm not the one talking. And actually, you're right, you know. And I always encourage people when we're talking about these commercial conversations, coming back to my secret sauce, when you're going to meet a client, you know, somebody potentially that might buy some coaching work from you, how much are you talking versus how much are they talking? And I would hazard a guess, and I know I do it, when I get all excited about what I do, I want to talk. But actually, what do you do to put your coaching hat on and step back and listen? And I think for all those coaches listening, and there's a story. Have I got time to share a little story about where that started? There was a time many years ago now where I was working with FTSE, 100 businesses and board level meetings. And I would always go with somebody more senior than myself. And that was okay. And I worked there and I enjoyed it. And then one day I got out the tube station in London and I got this WhatsApp going, really sorry, been sick all night, not coming. You're going to meet the CFO on your own. And I literally had the jitter. I'm like, shit, what? I've always been covered. And so it was about a 5-10 minute walk to the offices. And I was like, what would you do if you were coaching? What would you do if you were coaching? You're coaching. And so as I walked up the steps and I was like, do you know what? Just treat this as meeting another human being. Just treat this. You know the guy. And we had probably the best and deepest conversation that I've ever had with one of my clients. And yes, I understood at the end of it what was important to them as a business and maybe a couple of follow-up conversations. But I understood what he was planning for retirement and, what his children were doing and how he had, different passions for certain sports and things like that I'd never got to understand when I'd gone alongside somebody else. And that was part of that genesis of thinking to go, actually, you know what, there's something powerful in this. What are the skills that we've got as coaches that aren't just useful to support others, aren't just useful to lead in a great way, but actually have real commercial benefit? And putting our own coaching hats on when we're going out to have some of these conversations.
Helen, what would you recommend to our listeners as far as a few resources? It doesn't have to be necessarily books, or what would you recommend for them to read, listen to, watch?
Listen to, I'm going to plug my own podcast. So Human Wise is available on all good podcasts. There's also the blog that's associated with it that's listed on my website, which is www.thehumanadvantage.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn. I would also say the Institute of Coaching. I don't know if either of you guys are members, but the Institute of Coaching is a phenomenal organization linked to Harvard, and there's a lot of science and research around coaching. And I've been a member for a number of years now, and actually looking at fellowship. But there's real great resources there that I would encourage people to look at. And I know you've got a global audience. I'm going to offer something different as the final resource. I'm going to ask them what they've got inside themselves as their own resource to help them think forward. And what might that be? If they did 3 minutes of journaling, what is my resource? What resources do I need? 3 minutes of journaling and just see what emerges.
Great. Thank you. Dave, your thoughts?
The last thing really struck me because what I've learned is the power of reflection in coaching and teaching coaches is something that we don't always spend enough time in, like looking inside yourself. And I think that's really powerful. The reflection on Helen, I listened to some of your podcasts and I really loved it. I love the energy. I love the guests that you had on. And in talking to you, I sense a journey that you have made to just dive into it, to move forward and to be fearless. And I think it's what so many people are in a position where they have the skills to be a good coach. They have a lot to offer the world, and they, as your husband said, need to get out of the house.
Yeah.
So I'm left with that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. It's been brilliant to meet both of you. And Matt, I wish you a great time in London. If you've got a spare hour, let me know. Though actually, I'm on a coaching retreat next week. So that's going to be really interesting. I'm heading out to Romania with another wonderful lady that I met back in 2015, actually. Is another amazing coach called Alina Addison. So, heading out there. But have a wonderful trip.
Thank you. You know what? I would say my reflection is this may... After listening to everything you've said and your husband's advice, my reflection is just do it anyway. Like that's what comes to mind. I think sometimes the fear of showing up or I think there's just a lot of fear maybe that I have as a business owner, as a coach, especially early on, you're thinking, what in the world? Wow, this seems overwhelming. Where do I start? And your description of the acronym HUMAN is very, very helpful just to break it down. And then it all seems to come back to there's a certain amount of self-reflection that I have to have. I have to be willing to, I would say, get silent or get quiet and ask some really important hard questions because I think my clients are need it as much as I do. If I'm going to really show up, having thought about the questions for myself that I'm going to ask, and otherwise I'm memorizing a list of questions. I'm sure there's probably plenty of people that are listening that, you've got these impactful questions that you got in a coaching skills workshop or that you learned in your coach training. And all of those questions I need to ask myself and answer.
And I would just add to one further point on that, Matt, the transformation that I have been on as a coach is so that I never have questions prepared. I never go into a client knowing what I'm going to ask them because I never have any idea what's coming in. And that's that deep work that you have to be able to do to be able to hold yourself. Goes back to the act and adapt, that no matter what comes up in a conversation, a great and skilled coach will be able to deal with it. And that's the adapt piece. That's following the conversation. That's reading the room. That's pushing the buttons. That's showing, what are you sensing in your body? What's emerging for you? And having the confidence to put it into the room. But in order to do that, you need to do the transformational work on yourself first.
Well said. Yeah, and I think you just described the journey to advanced coaching, which is really cool because I have a lot of students who are absolutely obsessed with getting a better question. And it's not, as you stated, right? It's not it.
And I would argue that actually you're doing your clients a disservice if you go in with pre-prepared questions. Maybe that's something to challenge yourselves about, to think about.
I like it. Matt, we're changing all the podcast questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Throw them out. We're just going to say hello. All right.
Helen, the best way to get a hold of you is over LinkedIn and your website.
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. So Helen Wada conveniently has the same initials as Human Wise.
Oh.
Did I know that when I planned it? No, not really. But, maybe there's a secret marketeer in there. So Helen Wada, and that's WADA. Find me on LinkedIn and you'll find my website from there. But please reach out if you've got any questions. You're setting up your business. You don't know where to start. I'm open, right? Let's share and learn together and collaborate. I've had 2 conversations this week that people in a similar position. I'm happy where I can to share my time and give others some of the learnings that I've had. I hope this has been helpful and been brilliant to be on the show.
Yeah, it has.
I'm going to give a shout out to our sponsor. Are you feeling stuck or overwhelmed? Character Matters Coaching and Consulting provides leadership coaching and consulting to empower you to overcome obstacles and reach your full potential. Visit charactermatterscoaching.com to learn more about their transformative coaching and how to get connected to my role model for fearlessly moving forward, Matt, for your organization.
Thank you again, Helen. This has really been a pleasure and a joy. And for all of our listeners, we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast, please share it with another coach or leader. Make sure you go to the show notes to get all the resources from today's episode.